Welcome to British Accent Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast where we make English learning simple, fun, and practical. I'm Emma, and today we're tackling a big challenge for many learners: how to think in English without translating everything in your head.
Yeah, this is a game changer.
A lot of people feel stuck because their brain automatically switches back to their native language, and that slows everything down. But don't worry, we've got some great tips to help you break that habit.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. How can you start thinking directly in English?
First things first, you've got to surround yourself with English as much as possible.
The more you expose yourself to the language, the easier it becomes to process thoughts without translating.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Start with simple things. When you see an object, name it in English in your head. Like if you see a tree, don't think of the word in your native language first. Just say tree immediately.
Exactly. And another great trick is to narrate your day in English.
You don't have to say it out loud, but as you go about your day, think in English.
Like, I'm making coffee, or I need to go to work now.
Right. It's about training your brain to skip that extra step of translation. And if you want to level up, you can even try describing things in more detail. Instead of just tree, maybe think, that's a tall green tree swaying in the wind.
That's a solid tip.
Another thing that helps is using English for problem solving. If you're making a to-do list or planning something, try doing it in English.
The more you use it for thinking, the more natural it becomes.
Oh, and speaking of making things natural, stop stressing about mistakes. People hesitate to think in English because they're worried about getting it wrong. But here's the truth. Your brain won't make the switch if you're too focused on being perfect.
So true. Perfection is the enemy of progress. Kids don't learn by worrying about grammar first.
They just start using the language.
That's how you should approach it too. Just let your thoughts flow in English, even if it's not 100% perfect.
Yes, and another fun way to train your brain is through immersion. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, read books in English. Even if you don't understand every word, your brain is absorbing the rhythm and structure of the language.
That's a huge one. And when you hear a phrase or sentence, try repeating it in your head a few times. The more familiar it becomes, the less you'll need to translate when you actually use it.
Great point. And don't forget to practice with a conversation partner or even talk to yourself if no one's around. Just hearing your own thoughts in English will reinforce that habit.
Exactly. The goal here is to make English feel like a natural way of expressing yourself.
The more you practice, the easier it gets.
And another great way to build this habit is by asking yourself questions in English throughout the day. Like, what should I eat for lunch? Or what do I need to do next? Instead of thinking in your native language first, try answering directly in English.
That's a great tip. And you can even take it a step further. Pretend you're explaining something to someone in English.
Maybe summarize what you did today, describe something you saw, or even talk about a topic you enjoy.
Yeah, the more you practice thinking in full sentences, the more automatic it becomes. And honestly, you don't even need to say it out loud. Just running the sentences in your mind is already a powerful exercise.
Exactly. And if you get stuck, don't panic.
Instead of switching back to your native language, try using simple English to explain what you mean.
Like, if you don't know the word for fridge, you could think, that cold thing where I put my food.
Yes, that's a key skill: learning to describe things instead of relying on translation. Native speakers do this all the time when they forget words. It's a great way to keep your brain in English mode.
And one more fun idea: change the language on your phone and apps to English.
That way, every time you use your phone, you're reinforcing English vocabulary without even thinking about it.
I love that. It's a simple trick, but it really makes a difference. The goal is to create an environment where English feels natural, so your brain starts using it automatically.
And once that happens, thinking in English becomes second nature.
Another thing that really helps is immersing yourself in English as much as possible. For example, if you're scrolling through social media, try following accounts that post in English. That way, even your casual reading time becomes a learning opportunity.
Absolutely. And don't just read, engage.
Leave comments in English, join discussions, and interact with content as if you were a native speaker. This small habit trains your brain to process thoughts in English more naturally.
Right. And if you're into movies or TV shows, start watching them without subtitles or at least with English subtitles instead of your native language. This forces your brain to connect words with their meanings directly without translating.
That's a game changer. And if full movies feel overwhelming, start with short clips or even YouTube videos. The key is exposure, seeing and hearing English daily in different contexts.
Another fun trick is narrating your actions in English. Like, when you're cooking, think, I'm cutting vegetables now. Or when you're walking, I need to turn left here. It might feel strange at first, but it really helps to train your brain to think in English.
That's a great point.
And the best part is, no one has to hear you do it.
You can just think silently, and over time, this will become a natural habit.
And if you ever find yourself struggling for a word, instead of getting frustrated, try to describe it in simple English. This is what fluent speakers do all the time.
Exactly.
It's all about shifting your mindset. Instead of aiming for perfection, focus on staying in English mode as much as possible.
The more you do that, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
And speaking of confidence, one of the biggest mindset shifts you can make is accepting that it's okay to make mistakes. A lot of people hesitate to think in English because they're afraid of thinking the wrong way. But guess what? There's no such thing.
That's so true. Even native speakers make mistakes all the time. The difference is, they don't stop to correct themselves in their heads. They just keep going. If you do the same when thinking in English, you'll get used to processing ideas more naturally.
Exactly, and a great exercise for that is storytelling. Just take a random event from your day and try to tell yourself the story in English. It can be something super simple, like what you ate for breakfast or what happened on your way to work.
Yes, and don't worry about making it perfect. If you get stuck, just describe the idea in another way. The goal isn't to translate perfectly, but to keep your brain thinking in English instead of your native language.
Another fun method is to imagine conversations. Picture yourself talking to a friend or even a famous person in English. What would you say? How would they respond? It's like rehearsing for real-life situations, and it makes English feel more natural.
That's such a good technique.
And if you want to take it further, you can actually record yourself speaking.
It might feel awkward at first, but it's a great way to track your progress and build confidence.
Yes, plus, when you listen back, you'll start to notice patterns, words you use often, areas where you pause, and things you might want to improve. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with thinking and speaking in English.
And that's the whole goal, right?
To make English second nature.
The more you expose yourself to it, the less you'll rely on translating. It's all about building the habit and trusting yourself to improve with time.
Absolutely. And another thing that helps is setting specific situations where you force yourself to think in English. For example, every time you check your phone, describe what you're doing in English in your head.
That's a great trick, even for simple things like, I'm opening my messages, or I need to reply to this email. Small habits like that make a big difference over time.
And if you enjoy journaling, try writing a few sentences in English every day. It doesn't have to be anything deep, just simple thoughts about your day, your plans, or even how you're feeling. The more you train your brain to express ideas in English, the easier it will be to think in English naturally.
Oh, and another thing. When you're watching a movie or a TV show in English, try predicting what the characters are going to say next.
It forces your brain to actively engage with the language instead of just passively listening.
That's such a good tip. It turns language learning into a fun challenge instead of just something you're trying to get through.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, the key is consistency.
The more you expose yourself to English in your daily life, the less you'll rely on translation, and the more natural your thinking process will become.
And another fun way to practice is by setting specific times during the day when you only use English. Maybe during breakfast, you describe what you're eating in English, or when you're commuting, you think about what you need to do for the day entirely in English.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have someone to talk to, you can still have conversations with yourself. Like, pretend you're explaining something to a friend, or even narrate what you're doing as you go about your day.
That's a great one. It might feel weird at first, but it really helps train your brain to process English naturally.
And honestly, the biggest shift happens when you stop overthinking. A lot of learners hesitate because they're afraid of making mistakes. But the more you just let yourself think and speak freely, the faster you'll improve.
Yes, making mistakes is part of the process. The goal isn't to be perfect, it's to keep practicing until thinking in English becomes automatic.
So, start small, be consistent, and most importantly, have fun with it.
The more enjoyable the process, the easier it will be to stick with it.
Another trick that works really well is immersing yourself in different types of content. For example, if you usually watch English movies with subtitles in your native language, try switching to English subtitles instead. Then, as you get more comfortable, turn them off completely.
Right.
And if you're into books, audiobooks are another great option.
Listening while reading along helps you connect words with their pronunciation, making it easier to think in English naturally.
And let's not forget music. Singing along to songs in English can train your brain to process language in a fun and effortless way. The rhythm and melody help with retention, so you start recalling words and phrases without even realizing it.
That's a solid point.
The key is to surround yourself with English as much as possible.
Change your phone settings. Follow English-speaking influencers. Read news articles, just make it part of your daily life.
And another cool trick, when you learn a new word or phrase, try to use it immediately. Whether you write it in a journal, say it out loud, or use it in a message to a friend, the more you practice, the better your brain remembers it.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, learning a language isn't about memorizing isolated words. It's about getting used to thinking in it naturally. So the more exposure you get, the faster you'll reach that point.
Exactly. And one thing that really helps is describing your day in English, even if it's just in your head. You don't have to say it out loud, just think through your routine in English. For example, when you wake up, you can say to yourself, I'm getting out of bed. I'm brushing my teeth. I'm making coffee.
That's a great habit. It forces you to actively think in English instead of relying on translation.
And over time, it becomes automatic.
Another tip is to set small challenges for yourself. Like, for one whole day, try not to use your native language when thinking about simple things. If you don't know a word, find a way to describe it in English instead of translating.
That's a powerful technique. It's actually what native speakers do when they forget a word, they explain it in another way. So if you practice this, you're not just improving your vocabulary, but also training yourself to think flexibly in English.
And let's not forget the power of speaking with yourself. A lot of learners think it's weird, but talking to yourself in English is one of the fastest ways to build confidence. You don't need a conversation partner, just practice forming sentences out loud.
Absolutely. You can even record yourself speaking and listen back.
It helps you catch mistakes, improve pronunciation, and track your progress over time.
And one final piece of advice, don't be afraid to make mistakes. The more you allow yourself to think in English without overanalyzing, the more natural it becomes.
That's such an important point.
Thinking in English isn't about being perfect. It's about making it a habit. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Exactly. So, to recap, describe your daily activities in English, challenge yourself to avoid translating, talk to yourself, and don't be afraid of mistakes. These small steps can make a huge difference over time.
And remember, progress takes time. Be patient with yourself and celebrate the little wins along the way.
Thanks for joining us today. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share it with a friend who's also learning English.
And if you have any questions or topics you want us to cover in future episodes, let us know.
We love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep practicing and keep thinking in English. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.